Bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge. Till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge.
100 years ago, World War I erupted, and to commemorate the Sandbachsians that lost their lives during the war, the students, in partnership with Sandbach School, created the Peace Garden, a memorial that signifies the devastating loss that the school experienced.
The new Peace Garden out the front of school, I think, is a wonderful idea.
It's a great link in between the past. It's important to remember it.
It's brilliant in the commemoration period that boys here can go down, they can go and look at it, they can reflect on it.
And it's just a bit different, really. We've got plaques. I think other schools and towns and villages have got plaques, memorials.
It's a kind of positive way of remembering the old boys of Sandbach that were involved in World War I, and it kind of really will kind of get it into their minds what World War I was all about.
Sandbach lost 724 locals as a result of the war. 36 of those were Sandbach School students. One of those students was Frederick Arnold Sproston, a second lieutenant in the Cheshire Regiment. Frederick Sproston joined the Army's Cheshire Regiment in 1914 like most other men from Sandbach. Because of his intelligence and capability, he was promoted to second lieutenant. He was a soldier in the 6th Battalion, which was stationed in Kemmel, Belgium. Kemmel was the commanding area between Armentières and Ypres.
After the Battle of Kemmel, there were so many bodies. The field looked like a flock of sheep lying still. There were men still alive, screaming for help and plucking at my leg as I trudged by them.
Do you have some ideas of how the Germans attacked the British? I've been to the battlefields sort of 4 times now, so that's one thing that I've kind of spent a bit of time looking at.
So they sort of came in through Belgium, and we sent our BF, the British Expeditionary Force, over to, our only bit of professional army.
The techniques that the Germans used were by and large very similar to the techniques that the Allied forces used, the British, French and so on. So
in terms of the way the Germans would attack the British, one key thing was that the Germans would often have the higher ground, so they would, for various different reasons, would often be on a hill or just basically hide in the British trenches.
On the 24th of July 1918, the 6th Battalion Cheshire Regiment got orders to move 20 kilometres west to relieve a London regiment. On their way, they were bombarded by a German artillery platoon 4 kilometres away. Frederick Sproston suffered heavy wounds and died 6 days later in a field hospital. He was one of 36 students to lose their lives during the war.
Can you explain to us what trench warfare was like?
unpleasant.
Trench warfare was tough because the last war was a war of movement against the Boers, so just the first time it's 20th century warfare, mass machinery being produced, rifles, artillery shells, and therefore it would have been horrendous.
In terms of physical, it would just been, it would have been obviously a highly dangerous place to be. Mentally, it would have been very difficult.
The conventional wisdom has this image of bombardment, regularly seeing friends killed by artillery shells.
You don't know the tactics, that's why it went on for so long. It's trying to rethink of tactics you could use with people that weren't necessarily trained in the mass armies.
Just knowing that you were going to be sent to the trenches must have been incredibly difficult for soldiers.
Sandbach School, like any other school, inspired army recruitment. People were swept up by the patriotism and propaganda and enlisted as soon as they could. Posters were printed to make the army look appealing to the public. Other posters instructed men that it was their duty to join and would benefit if they did. In August 1916, a famous film was shown about men fighting in the Battle of the Somme. Around 1 million people saw their film at their local theatre in the first 6 weeks after it was released. It was the first time people could see soldiers in the trenches, guns firing and wounded men. The public walked away from this film feeling more patriotic than before and felt the urge to serve their country.
In terms of the education of students, of boys at this school, at that time, it would have been a very, very limited curriculum.
School days would have been sporadic. I think some of the teachers might have been called up, and then you think who would have been called in, or schools cancelled for the day.
One thing that I found out quite recently was that during World War I was you had a house called the Boarders' House and the Schoolhouse, and actually 1914 to 1980 was 4 years that were actually quite vibrant in the house calendar.
I don't think it would have been massively affected, but maybe a bit of propaganda in the lesson.
There would have been an increasingly heavy emphasis on patriotism and British values.
Despite World War I happening, actually there was clearly an attempt to try and keep life as far close to normal as possible.
100 years on, we are still at war. Not with the world, but with the Middle East. Technology is an obvious difference, but the fundamentals are quite the same. Tanks now roam the battlefields, and jets scour the skies. We now have the Combined Cadet Force, which is an MOD-sponsored youth organisation in the UK. Its aim is to provide a disciplined organisation in a school, so that many pupils may develop powers of leadership. It was formed in 1948 and consists of the Army, Navy and RAF. Over 100 students from Sandbach School are involved in the CCF, with 8 staff as acting officers. The CCF was put in place to give the students a taste of the armed forces lifestyle, and to give them basic training if a war broke out in Europe again. Every year they acknowledge World War I and the people who lost their lives by marching through the town bearing the Great British flag. The role of schools and towns like Sandbach has decreased, and there are many less patriotic advertisements for the army. However, we will always remember those who fought for our town and our country.
It's a question I'm often asked. Given what you know about the First World War, sir, surely you wouldn't have gone.
Part of me would have thought now that I wouldn't have gone along with it because it was a ridiculous decision.
But I suspect that I would have felt the patriotic stirrings in my breast and signed up with the best of them.
If I was there then, I would have been very patriotic. I'm a schoolboy, I would have wanted to fight and go off and done my duty.